Okay.
So thank you very much for joining this living room interview.
Pleasure.
At my place. Well, I read a nice paper from the Leeds University. It's an introduction about you. You hold a bachelor in popular and world music from the Leeds University.
Correct.
And a master in sound design from the Leeds Metropolitan University.
Correct.
Wow. And beside of this, you are a current PhD researcher in Groningen, and you work as a freelance producer and a composer and a performer.
All the things, yeah. So my PhD is at Leeds Met, which is now called Leeds Beckett University, but I'm doing that remotely while I live in Groningen. So yes.
Okay. And what's written there also is that you have at least a 10-year experience in the industry as a music producer and composer.
Yeah, it's
you have
more than that. I think I wrote that and it was about 10 years, and I'm older now, so yeah, more than 10 years.
Okay. Well, you have worked for multiple UK top 10 artists as a producer. Is that right?
Yeah, a few different people. I've worked with quite a lot of artists down the years, either kind of me producing something or collaborating, or different ways of working with different people.
Okay. So, and you also composed and produced for top corporate clients like Vogue, New Look and Marks and Spencer.
Yeah.
And then you also work as a composer and producer for videos, for video games, which includes also non-musical sound for film. And you are counseling and teaching upcoming artists.
Yeah, so kind of like consulting work, and kind of, I suppose, guidance, mentoring, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So in general, this is really a lot to talk about.
Yeah, I guess so.
Let's see how far we can come. Please tell me how you understand sound design and how you work as a sound designer.
Okay. So sound design, I did my master's in sound design, and I guess in the context of that, what it means is it's non-musical sound for film and video. So, anything that doesn't include the music, so it can be kind of sound effects, it can be Foley, things like that. So all the sounds that you hear when you're watching a video that aren't anything to do with the music or the dialogue, I guess. It's a phrase that people do tend to use in other contexts as well. So in electronic music, if you speak to like music producers kind of in electronic music, they tend to talk about a lot of what they do as sound design as well. So you kind of, it has started to be applied to music in some contexts as well. It's electronic manipulation of sound, I suppose.
Okay. Well, that brings me to the next one. It's a little bit about your past. Can you tell me a little bit, some stories maybe about your producer's life related to the UK top 10 artists you worked with?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't know if there's that many that people will have heard of or remember. Oh God, who have I been? So I guess more recently I did quite a run of songs with an artist called So Shy, who had a top 3 hit with Timbaland back about 15 years ago. But kind of more recently I've done quite a few songs with her for library music actually. And she sings and I produce, and I co-write with a guy called Jeff Dembiak in the USA, who I've done a lot of co-writing with. And we kind of create the backing tracks, and then we have a singer come in and sing on it, and then these tracks end up in music libraries with the aim of getting them on kind of film or TV or something like that. And yeah, So Shy, I guess, was one of these who kind of had like a big kind of pop past, and we ended up doing, I think, 5 or 6 songs with her. And yeah, she's a talented singer, talented writer.
Okay. Well, you are from Portsmouth
Yes.
in England. How did Portsmouth as a harbour city influence you as the artist you are today? Is there something specific you could mention?
Did Portsmouth influence me? I mean, it probably did. I guess everything kind of influences you in some way or another. I mean, I don't tend to use foghorns in my music that much. Although that's a sound that reminds me of home. I don't know. I mean, I think you get your influences from everywhere. I actually feel like, although I grew up around the corner from like quite a cool kind of like rock club called the Wedgewood Rooms it's like really just around the corner from my parents' house, and that was a great place to kind of go to gigs from the age of about 16 or something like that. There was always live music to go to. But I don't know, I feel like probably my musical home is more Leeds actually than Portsmouth. I mean, I moved to Leeds when I was 21, and I think I was much more part of that music scene. Portsmouth didn't have that much of a music scene, really. You could go to gigs, but it never felt like there was a real movement. It didn't feel like there was anything exciting happening there in the same way. Leeds is obviously a much bigger city. It's about 4 times the size of Portsmouth. It had a really kind of established music scene. And that's kind of the thing, I suppose. That's where I started getting into bands that were, did a little bit better. It's where I kind of started to make friends in other bands and so on. And so, although Portsmouth, I guess, is my home, I feel like Leeds is probably my musical home.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you tell me something like what you like about Portsmouth, even you look now back, which is more safe, of course, and maybe what you don't like about that place?
Yeah, I mean, although it's a city, I think there's like 250,000 people almost there. It has quite a small town feel to it. Most of the city is on an island, like the part where I grew up is on the island, so it has quite an insular, kind of inward-looking island mentality, which can be quite nice in a way. You know a lot of people, especially if you're part of the alternative scene in Portsmouth. You get to kind of know everyone quite quickly, and that's quite nice. But it's also really suffocating, I think, as well. Because you know everyone, and sometimes you want to go to places where you don't know everyone, and sometimes you want to experience new things outside of that. So. Yeah, I think when I go back now, I still, it's home, so I love going back, and it's nice to see people, it's nice to catch up with people. But, yeah, I'm normally ready to leave again after about a week, probably.
Okay, well, now you're living in Groningen since some years. What do you like about this new environment? How does this work for you?
Well, it's nice to move to a new country, because we were living kind of in and around London just before we came here, and it's my first time living outside of the UK as an adult. So I did for a while when I was a kid, but that's nice. I mean, it's good to mix things up a little bit, isn't it? I think it's refreshing to move somewhere new, whether that's a new city or a new country or whatever. And I think Groningen is quite an exciting place. There's a big university here. There's a lot of young people here, and it sort of feels quite vibrant, and there's new stuff to do and new people to meet, and yeah, it's kind of engaging with a different culture. I think it's just healthy, I mean, I think especially if you're an artist of any description, you kind of need new input to get new ideas. But I think not just for artists, I think for anyone it's quite healthy to put yourself in slightly different situations that maybe challenge you in a different way,
Okay. Can you please explain me what non-musical sound for film and video games mean for you? What is your fascination for this field of work, and where does it come from? for you?
Yeah, so I mean, I think what's interesting about non-musical sound is the way you can kind of use it to tell a story. So, in a basic way, you can just add some footsteps to an image of someone walking, whether that's in a game or it's in a film or whatever. And it doesn't necessarily have to tell you anything, I guess, but it also can tell you something. So, maybe if there's like a big echo on the footsteps, does that make the person seem like they're in a bigger space? Does it make them feel like they're more alone, maybe? Because you wouldn't hear that kind of sound in a crowd. You can kind of do that. You can play around with almost every sound, and you can use it to kind of lead the narrative. You can use it to tell people about what's going on in maybe kind of a subtle way. So it's not something that people necessarily will read, but it's something that they will pick up on in some way or another. So a more traditional way to tell a story with sound is to do it with music. So, you play some sad music over a scene in a film and the audience knows that they should feel sad. You play some threatening music and they know they should feel a little scared. But, people aren't stupid and, they hear this music and they clock what's going on. They understand the rules. They go, okay, the director of this film is telling me to feel sad now. If you can try and perform that same kind of function with sound, non-musical sound, it's a lot more subtle. So I think you can kind of manipulate that audience, maybe without them realizing that they're being manipulated. And I think that's kind of interesting. You can make people feel uncomfortable with sound, or you can make them feel at ease with sound, or whatever. And I think it's an interesting area.
Yeah. Where does it come from? I think you mentioned earlier that you saw a movie and you were fascinated.
Yeah, so for me, a lot of it comes from my masters. So I did a sound design masters, and I learned a lot of this stuff then. So kind of the theory behind it, some of the history of it, and so on. So I think the term, I might be wrong, but I think the term sound designer comes from a guy called Walter Murch, who worked with Francis Ford Coppola a lot. I think he's the one who came up with the idea of sound designer as a description for his own job, like the job that he was already doing. He applied a label to it, I suppose, and I think that's where the term sound design was used first. I think films like Apocalypse Now, like the Godfather films, I think the use of sound on those is fascinating, where sometimes, they have great use of music as well, but Coppola and Murch really, I think, use sound to kind of tell a story in a lot of ways in those films, and I think that's the starting point, I guess, for a lot of this modern stuff. Although people were doing stuff like that, way back into film history, it just maybe didn't have a name until Murch coined it.
Right. Well, can you tell me what kind of video games you you work with for this non-musical sound? What's happening in these games, and how do you place the sound there? What is the function there?
I haven't done a lot of that, actually. With games, I've mainly done music. So I don't know if you want me to talk about that. I've done little bits of sound design for games, but it tends to be quite simple, like for apps and stuff like that, so quite fairly basic stuff. I've done my bigger game projects have been kind of music composition rather than sound design. So I don't know, do you want me to talk about that? Or
Well, then let's talk about sound samples, because I think you use a lot of sound samples for your work. How do you collect them? How do you compose maybe them? Where do you find them? And what is important for you to have in a sound sample?
Yeah, I use a lot of samples, I guess, in one way or another. Probably most pieces of music that I make will have at least one or two samples in there, I guess. And that kind of it ranges from, I guess, some things that I make are almost entirely made of samples in some way or another. Some don't have many, but they're just a really useful tool, I guess, and it's I get them from a variety of sources. So for like my PhD work, all of the samples that I use are things that I've recorded myself in the field, so it's all field recorded stuff. So I go out on location with a microphone, point a microphone at stuff, try and find a cool sound, try and get a good recording of it, take it back to the studio, and then I'll use that that sample as a starting point to then create a more complex or more manipulated sound, but these are kind of the building blocks. When I'm doing kind of music composition work, I don't tend to record any of my own samples. I use sample libraries, which I think is the same thing that most composers do these days. There are so many huge libraries out there that you have access to. And so, for example, I was working on a song today, which is kind of a piano ballad kind of a thing. And it has, the main thing is a piano in there, which I played, and then there's some guitar on there, which I recorded, and so on. But then at the start of it, I wanted to do like an introduction, which had like a music box sound, and then like a kind of a orchestral cymbal kind of thing. And so those I got from samples, and like I had a sample instrument that sounds like a music box, so I could move the notation from the piano that I'd recorded. I could just kind of stick that into my software, and immediately what I had, like the piano part that I had, is now being played on a music box in the introduction. And you can do, something, if you have that idea with the software and the samples that, you have these days at your disposal as a composer, that took 30 seconds. And then the orchestral cymbal, I went online, and there's a big, it's called Splice. It's a big kind of aggregator of loads and loads of sample packs. So I don't know how many they've got, probably hundreds of thousands. You type in orchestral cymbal, and then you get like 500 to choose from. And I found one in about a minute that was okay, and then you're off, and that's in. So all these things are kind of, they're useful tools to just kind of keep you moving, because I think, you still need to be able to write a piece of music that works as a piece of music, but you don't need to spend as long on some of these kind of aspects of it. I don't need to go out and record an orchestral cymbal because someone else has already done that really well, and I find a recording of one that I like and it can go into my track.
Okay. Well, you are also a composer of stock music, you told me earlier, which is a huge library, right? Mm-hmm. Can you explain the work you are doing? What's going on for people who don't know about that? Okay, so the analogy I normally use is, because I think most people are familiar with like stock photography. So if you're writing, like if you're a journalist writing an article on the internet and you need a picture of someone looking sad, or you need a picture of a particular mountain or whatever, you can go into a library and you can get that image and you can pay someone for the use of it. And I think most people are aware that those things exist. So exactly the same thing exists with music. And so this song I was working on today, for example, that's for a library. So that's going to sit inside a music library. And you attach various, either you or the person who runs the library will attach various keywords, kind of metadata to it, and then a TV producer, someone like a music supervisor who works on a TV show or is finding the music for an advert, or is working on a film or something, will go to this library and say, okay, I want a song that is this kind of rough tempo, has this kind of instrumentation, has these keywords in the lyrics, something like that, and with a bit of luck, they'll find one of our songs and they'll like it and they'll use it on their TV show. At which point we get paid for doing that. And I do quite a lot of this stuff, and I quite like it because it's, I don't know, when you talk about creating library music, I think a lot of the time people expect it to be kind of really, I don't know, like really kind of mediocre, mundane sounding music. Like people, you think it might be sort of like lift music or something. But actually,
that's not the kind of music that people want on their TV shows. They want stuff that sounds exciting. They want stuff that sounds current. It sounds interesting. So actually, the music you get to do is quite cool, and you get to work on a really wide range of music as well. So like last week I was working on a Ramones kind of sounding punk track. The week before that I was doing like a Calvin Harris kind of EDM thing. Now I'm working on like a slow burning piano ballad, and for me that's good because you get to, you don't get too bored of doing the same thing over and over again.
Okay. Well, I found a quote in one of these papers about your work.
Okay.
It says choreographing sound that exists in time and in space. What does it mean?
Choreographing sound that exists in time and in space. Okay. So I think that's a lot more related to my research, so my PhD work, where I create immersive musical compositions. So, in brief, because I can talk about this probably for too long, in brief, I write immersive pieces of music that are really kind of large scale. So they exist kind of virtually, but in a specific space. So a space that's, a kilometre square, something like that. And people can wander around inside those, and the music changes dependent on their location. So these are delivered through smartphones. So everyone's smartphone has, GPS capabilities these days. So your phone knows where you are, and it will play back the music accordingly. So wherever you are, the music is going to be different. You listen through headphones, and what you can do that's quite interesting is you can map the music to like real world physical locations. So if there's a specific landmark, as you walk closer to that point, the music gets louder, or the music gets angrier, or the music gets sadder, or whatever. And as you move to a different location, it changes in a different way. And so you can kind of give people this kind of experience that is very matched to their own movements, to their own location, and so on and so forth. What was the quote that you said then again? I can't remember it.
It's a choreographing sound that exists in time, especially.
Yeah.
And I put space.
Space is, because space is relevant. So I suppose that's it. So I guess like the way that these pieces work, the way my pieces tend to work quite a lot of the time is they're loops. So those loops will be triggered as you walk into a certain space. So say if you walk into Groningen, you walk into the big square in the middle of Groningen. At the moment that you reach that square and all of a sudden everything opens up in front of you, a certain passage will start playing. So that music exists at a certain point in time that is kind of defined by the listener, by the participant, and at a certain point in space. And I'm kind of interested in what you can do with that, I suppose. I'm particularly interested in trying to maybe say something about a specific location through this kind of music, through this kind of like immersive art, try to communicate something to the audience.
Okay, yeah, well, now we are talking already about your PhD research.
Yep.
Which is kind of nice, actually. And indeed, you composed sounds that exist already in a specific environment. And in this case, around the area Martini Tower here in Groningen. Well, the title is Justice, Freedom, Peace and Memory. Can you please explain how you get that title and what you want to say with that, with these words?
So the title comes from the War Memorial, which is behind the big Martini Tower in Groningen. So the War Memorial is called Sint Joris en de Draak, so St. George and the Dragon, and in Latin, so I've translated it, it says justice, freedom, peace on the statue itself. So I guess this particular piece is the centre of it really, I suppose, is this war memorial. And what I'm interested in with this is, this is obviously it's a statue that has a real significance. It has a relevance to this location, and it's kind of almost right in the city centre, but it's not quite. It's just round a corner, so it's almost in the centre of town. But it's very easy to walk past it without thinking about it, without even knowing it's there, to be honest. I mean, when I did the premiere of this piece back in May, and I think half the people in the room who lived in the city didn't even know it was there. So that's kind of, I suppose that was kind of my point. That's what I was aiming for. So this is something that you can walk past every day and not realise it's there. So I was thinking, okay, so with my piece of music, can I bring people to this location? Number one. And number two, can I get them to consider what it means, like persuade them to engage with that location, to engage with that war memorial? And the way I chose to do this is, basically you can start the piece any way you like in the city centre. It kind of it radiates about, I think, 1 kilometre in each direction from, maybe not quite, but maybe 800 metres in each direction from the memorial. And right next to the memorial is the Martini Tower, which is the highest point in the city of Groningen. So it's kind of like a natural focal point. So wherever you are, when you start listening to the piece of music, the instruction that you get when you open the app on your phone is to walk towards Martini Tower, which is kind of an easy point to locate. You can naturally navigate to it. And as you get closer and closer, the music becomes more and more intense, more kind of, I guess, abrasive in a way. It becomes becomes denser, it becomes louder. And then as you approach the tower, as you get right to the base of the tower, the piece kind of reaches a climax. And from there you walk round to the side to where the memorial is, and the music stops. So it fades away quite abruptly. The idea being that you leave people right next to this memorial, you've kind of led them there, and all of a sudden everything feels very quiet because you have the contrast with that sort of massive crescendo that you've only just been listening to. So we're leaving people here with what is hopefully a profound silence, to maybe think about the location, think about what it means, to engage with that, in whatever way they want to. I don't want to tell people, how to feel, but I just want to maybe push them in a direction and see what happens. And then there's a kind of a final part of the piece. There's a really nice little garden just behind there, where there's kind of composed almost a completely different movement to the piece. So if you then wander through to the garden, you'll hear like a different passage of music that is more relevant to the soundscape in that garden, is more relevant to how it feels when you're in the garden, and that kind of is a bit calmer, a bit more melodic, and I suppose people can then use that for contemplation as well. So that was the idea behind that one. And I want to do probably another 5 of these, something like that, as part of my PhD work. And I don't know what form they're going to take, because I think the form of each piece will be very much related to the location. And so the way this piece works is very specific to the fact that the Martini Tower is in the centre and the war memorial is right next to it, and you kind of work from there. What's the history of the location? What's the physical structure of the location? How can I make something that works? And so I guess with each future location, I'll have to look at what that location means, what its history is, what its geography is, and then try and figure out something interesting to do within those parameters.